So I understand we are live now. Well, thank you very much, Natasha, and good afternoon, everybody. Very happy to be here. Welcome to this Bridge Over Troubled Water session. I'm Rémi Devet. I'm the chief editor of Boardroom magazine. Boardroom is an association management magazine, so we don't write about meetings per se, but we write about anything related to association management, really, and we launched that in 2017 together with Cecil Corr. And early this summer, we also launched the Boardroom mini courses, which are hands-on, very practical, short videos targeted at associations. And hopefully associations can learn from those very short videos. All those videos are produced and delivered by experts, and I'm talking about those mini courses because obviously Mark Mackey, who I'm going to do this session with, is part of our expert panel for those mini courses. Indeed, Mark, you contribute greatly to the mini courses in your quality of tech and community experts. And in fact, you actually joined the Boardroom team quite earlier this year, and we can say that you're really part of the team now. But you're also, and I have to say that, you're also the co-founder of Bond, which is a digital innovation company for associations. So why did we decide to create this session? Well, because we're obviously aware of the depths of the crisis we're going through, and we want to be part of the solution, simply. So we believe that community building is part of it, and that's exactly what we are going to talk about right now. But just a quick note before we deep dive into it. I understand you have, as an audience, whether online or physically, you have the possibility to ask questions as the session is going. So feel free to shoot them in whichever format you like. I might take them as we go. I might take them at the end of the session, depending on the relevance of it. But don't be afraid to disagree. Don't be afraid to be shy. Just fire away, and we'd be happy to answer them if we have time at the end. So Mark, like I said, you're tech, but you're also a community expert. So you often talk about the importance of community building as if it's different from events. But to me, at least, events are all about community. So what is the difference, you would say?
Thank you, Remy, and hello to everyone who is watching from wherever in the world. It's a pleasure to be here today and to be part of this greater community, which is a word I'm going to be coming back to a lot. And so, yeah, thank you for that question. It's a very good one, and I think that's something that's going to become increasingly relevant as we manage the next 10 years of inevitable disruption, right? I mean, a lot of people have started referring to this decade as the turbulent 20s, and I think it's safe to say, based on 2020, that that's looking like it might be likely. So, you know, as a technologist and a futurist, what I do is I try to find and create solutions that are based on advanced modern technologies, yes, and maybe somewhat surprisingly, I really believe that a lot of the solutions to our current predicaments, you know, they can be found in the past effectively, and that's where I tend to look. I'm a bit of a history buff as well. And, you know, we don't really spend a lot of time thinking about the world as it was, you know, let's say 5,000 or 10,000 years ago, right? We just don't do that. We're too busy with our actual work. But I think we should, because if you start looking back in time towards those times, 5,000 to 10,000 years ago, you find that those are the origins of the first tight-knit human communities, right? It's the first time that human beings ever settled down in really tight-knit communities. And that era was called the Neolithic, the New Stone Age. And for the first time, after hundreds of thousands of years, roaming the land, looking for food sources and stable lives, we settled down into these communities. And so as our ancestors discovered the merits of agriculture and animal domestication, you know, there was no need to start moving around anymore, right? You had this stability. And so they formed these very tight-knit communities and then villages and empires, and that was happening all over the world. And in fact, a lot of the qualities of the world, the historical artifacts, the ideals, the political structures, everything is still predicated on those early communities, right? So it pays to look back at history as well.
Yeah, so I understand that. It's all good, but how does that relate to modern events as we know them?
It relates to modern events because they didn't have any to begin with, right? You know, the idea of people flying in from all over the world by the thousands into one place, into one venue for a short number of days to get together, that's a distinctly modern concept, right? It's not something that ever existed before in history, right? It started maybe 50 or 40 years ago. So what did they do instead, right? So instead, they relied on this very, very steady engagement in rather small communities. So what happened is you had this year-round, steady, stable exchange of culture, ideas, skills, and crafts, and art, and everything that came with early societies. And so the key phrases there is community consistency, right? You had all of this consistency that happened throughout the year. And so what are we looking at now is that in the modern times, thanks to the reach and affordability of modern air travel, we've added this whole new dimension to the world, which is this ability to hold large-scale events with people flying in from all over the world and mixing for just a few days. And, you know, of course, that's fantastic, right? This is not an argument in any way against events. On the contrary, right? We all know events are a big driver of commerce, of jobs, of, you know, security, of GDP.
Knowledge transfer, I mean, we all know
the knowledge transfer,
the benefits.
Education, you know, human togetherness, all of these things are fostered by the events industry. But I think there's a structural problem that we need to start talking about that's very, very pertinent here. And it's a structural problem that's been exposed by COVID, yes, but I am convinced it's going to be further exposed over the next decade and beyond as we face the inevitable disruption of the decade. And that structural problem that I'm talking about is that unlike this historical steady engagement that I was talking about with ancient communities, we treat engagement a little bit like a sugar rush, right? Like having a delicious piece of chocolate cake. You know, we get together in these wonderful events for a few days, and engagement spikes, and we all live on the thrill of togetherness and learning, and it's great, it's wonderful. But then what happens is, you know, after a few days, everyone packs up, everyone goes home to their respective corners of the world. And what you find more often than not is that that engagement sort of falls off a cliff. Yeah, right? There's no more residual engagement, really.
You could almost call that the glycemic index of events, actually. So it goes up, and once you leave the event, well, it goes down and back to work in your normal life.
That's a good way of putting it, the glycemic index. Yeah, it's a little bit like being diabetic. You have crashes and you have peaks. Right, so it's a bit of it's a feast to famine kind of paradigm. And what we've noticed is that once you remove the events from the equation, as we now have noticed, you're left with this enormous void, right? This enormous sense of loss that we have yet to fill satisfactorily. And okay, virtual events are great and it's wonderful, but it's a kind of a short-term panacea. And I'm willing to bet that if you ask the average events organizer or PCO or association, is that, you know, this is not something they look forward to in the future, right?
Yeah, no, they even shudder that it's going to be virtual only events. I have the feeling, but I also have the feeling that that nobody wants that anyway. I mean, it's good for now because we don't have a choice. Really, we can't look at us. I mean, we here. I'd rather be in Luxembourg with you and with Cecile, but for the time being, it's the only way we can do that safely. But by the time it's safe to travel, well, we'll be on the road again in a second. At the same time, I also, when I talk to associations, I also realize that they have realized because of this pandemic, that because of those virtual events that they organize, they have become aware that they can increase their reach. So they have a broader reach and they have a wider audience with their virtual events. People that would not have been included in their community, because that's what we're talking about, are now included, and that's a good thing. That's very, very good in terms of inclusion, of diversity, and of community building, really.
Yeah, I mean, and I totally agree, obviously, but one of the things that I try to advocate and talk about a lot, and part of the reason why I wanted to do this today as well, is that I think we should stop thinking purely in terms of events and start thinking in terms of communities. Right now, that sounds maybe a little bit controversial, but it doesn't mean that events are any less significant than they ever have been or will be in the future. Not to my understanding or my estimation. What I'm saying is that, you know, if an event solves the problem of togetherness and learning and excitement for 5 days out of the year or 10 days, it's time to formulate a solution and a strategy for the other 360 or 355 days, right? In fact, I was having a conversation with someone who actually was with ICCA for a while, Matthijs Fleming, and you know, we talk about events and about community because he's very big on that. And he said something the other day, which I absolutely fully agreed, and he summed it up as follows: is you don't build community around events, you build events around community, right? And that's very, very, very true, because one of the things that we need to realize collectively is that we're no longer just competing with other events or with other associations to an extent. You know, you have the likes of Netflix and Facebook and YouTube and all the other emerging platforms, and there is many, and their model is predicated on one thing alone, which is the complete and utter and total domination of everyone's attention span. And so you're in competition with those companies and those people as well. You know, and the reality is, because they do a lot of data aggregation, because of the nature of the platforms, they tend to know a lot more about your delegates than you do, right? They have all this data to go on and to create profiles around. So what they can do is they can serve people the content that they really want, because they know that much. In fact, they can serve you the things that you want before you know you want it, right? And so far, this is happening mostly in the entertainment world, but this is equally bleeding into the events world, into the education world, and every other industry. And so what I fear is, if you have for the future a business model that is purely based on short bursts of attention throughout the year, you have, I'm afraid, an unsustainable business model. Why? Because, you know, you're filling in 5% of the year in terms of time, but you're leaving 95% of the engagement time untapped, basically, right? And so I think you need to reverse that equation and just make sure that you have year-round community engagement.
So Mark, you're talking about business models, and obviously associations, they're all busy with reinventing the way they do business and their business models. So in your opinion, what could be a sustainable business model that takes into account this year-round engagement that you just mentioned, this year-round engagement of your member community? What could that be?
Well, the first thing I would say is that probably the ideas should be to abandon any zero-sum thinking about business models to begin with, right? I would stop defining too narrowly what you are as a business, which is something that we're all used to. This is who we are and what we do, but this disruption is kind of turning that on its head. And then also not feel threatened by other potential models that you can adopt. Because the reality is, new ideas that are born out of necessity, as we've seen in the last year or so, or the last 9 months, they don't make solid old models like events obsolete. Not at all. So I don't believe that the future is a choice between live or hybrid or virtual events or some fourth different kind of outcome, which I believe is going to be communities. These are all facets of the same ideal for humans to congregate and mix and socialize. And so there's going to be a lot of growth opportunities between all of those different facets. And so I think what we should do is we should also address the elephant in the room, right? We need to talk about the elephant in the room. Is there anyone out there who really honestly believes that this COVID crisis is the last major disruption we're going to face that will affect the travel industry heavily, and by consequence, the live events industry? It's just not going to happen, right? I mean, we have to be honest about that. When this storm passes, the COVID storm, there's another giant wave of disruption coming our way in terms of something for which there is no vaccine. And I think we all know what I'm talking about. And that's not even counting potential angry volcanoes or, civil unrest or any kind of disruption that we may face. So what I'm saying is that we all need flexible business models that can sort of bend and sway and move with the rhythm of the world as we go through the major disruption of the decades. And so if your viability as a business is contingent on travel, on mobility, then I think something isn't entirely right or not complete, right? It's not a future-proof way of doing things. So that's formulating the problem. So what could a solution look like? Mm-hmm. And so to find solutions, I think we need to not be shy, and we have to muster the courage to also look at other industries, right? Every industry that we're in, Mayan technology, events, association, we tend to be a little bit insular and we speak in echo chambers. We need to have the courage to look at other industries as well. And if you look around, if you start looking over the fence at other industries, one of the models that you find that are very, very successful at the moment are subscription models, right? Netflix is wiping the floor with traditional cinema even before COVID. And why is that? The reason for that is that they've tapped into a human need and they have consistent value released consistently throughout the year at a predictable cost, right? It's a winning formula that we've seen over the last decades.
Yeah. And yeah, if I may, Mark, if I may interject, I think here we have to make a difference between subscription models as a potential solution, like you just explained, and the traditional membership models as we know them, because I think it's a subtle, but it's a crucial distinction at the same time. So if I may briefly explain what the difference is, on one side, we've got the subscription. It's a periodic or continuous arrangement to receive a product or service. And membership, on the other side, is a state of belonging to an organization. So the first one, it implies an action, can be a service rendered, a product delivered. And the second one, the membership, is a more passive concept because it implies a sense of belonging or kinship, if you will. But it doesn't imply any continuous action from a personal point of view. And I think that's exactly what the problem is.
Yeah, that is the problem. I think we're conflating membership and community. And the reality is, a membership base is not automatically a community, right? Your membership is your starting point. It's your membership is an income. It's not an outcome, right? The outcome should be the building of community. Like, for example, if I joined a tennis club, which I've always wanted to do, let's suppose that I joined a tennis club, and you know, I'm not building skills or a network just by paying my membership, right? I actually have to have the consistency of going and becoming part of that community and being in the classes, but also mixing, socializing with the other people at the tennis club, right? So it's that consistency that really brings and forms community. And I don't think many associations, or most, really incentivize this continuous engagement throughout the year, right? So everything is always about events and congresses. And again, they're wonderful, but that's a very brief engagement model, right? It's not a long-term engagement model. So from the perspective of a member, and I think we should stop saying member and say customer, because your members are really your customers as well.
Yeah,
and
that's the specificities of associations, really. Your customers are your members. That's the only and only field that things like that happen.
Yeah, exactly. The member is a customer, right? Let's not conflate the two things. That's what they are. They're customers. And so it's much more appealing for a customer to be granted this continuous, ongoing, continuous value throughout the year, rather than 5 or 10 days when you have your congress. So how do you do that? Like, what can you actually do? And remember, I was talking about Netflix and giving those examples, and it taps into a reality that, in fact, associations are perfectly placed to tap into. And that's the idea of on-demand education, for example, right? People are always looking to upskill and learn and grow. And, you know, associations are in pole position when it comes to that. Why? Because you already have a built-in inherent audience. You have your membership base. You already have an audience, and you're specialists, because by the definition of what an association is, it's a group of people surrounding a specific ideal or a subject. So you already have an audience and you already have a specialization. So you can build an education platform, learning, you can do weekly workshops, and you have your own members to create content as well. So that's how you really create a sense of community in the world. And so the last thing I would say about that is that when you do that, you're not just incentivizing your members, right, and creating the possibility of recurring revenue as well as part of your formula, you're also really incentivizing your sponsors, because the more engagement there is in the system, the more that is music to the ears of the sponsors, because they can get their message in front of the right people. So that's one solution I would present.
Cool. Cool. So I think we understood quite rightly the importance of communities, and especially digital communities. But it's my feeling that not all associations have some sort of tech person, or they have the tech knowledge to explore the digital communities. So some of them are even shy. They don't have the resources, or they only have a very limited budget to dedicate to that digital transformation. So when it comes to digital transformation, how should they start the process and include online communities in it?
Yeah, so technology is my day-to-day, my bread and butter, and I think about this a lot, and I think that technology is both the greatest threat and the greatest opportunity to the associations world and to the events industry as well. And one thing that we all need to realize, and this is very easy to demonstrate with what's going on with digital consumption, is attention is the currency of the future, right? Everything can be expressed in terms of who owns the attention. That is the person or the company that owns the business, right? Like it or not, the path to a human mind is a Wi-Fi signal or a phone signal, a 4G or now a 5G signal. It's not another human being. And if that sounds controversial, it's just an observation of just how much content that we all consume on a digital basis, and it's rising exponentially.
Yeah, that reminds me of a big media guru back in France back a few years that has caused a very big controversy, because he was basically saying that he was not in charge of buying advertising space, but he was in charge of buying attention space from people, and that's what makes the difference. That resonates to me, what you just said. Yeah.
Well, yeah, exactly. I mean, thanks to him for saying that, because yes, that backs up my point. But it's elementary, right? It's not hard to do that math. We see that around us. So basically what that means is that in order for us to survive the next 10 years, or even probably the next 5, and then maybe in some cases the next 2, we need to do more than just be top of mind for just a few days a year, right? And if that sounds like I want everyone to overhaul their business completely, I don't think that's necessary at all. In reality, it really just starts with a few first steps that almost every business can take, and that doesn't mean a complete overhaul of their business model, right? If you look at Netflix and YouTube, once again, their success is not just the platform, right? The success is the fact that they have the data, the information about their users, to be able to give you a personalized experience. And combined with that other buzzword, on demand, personalization is the other one that you need to take to heart. On demand and personalization. If you remember nothing else from this talk, remember that phrase, because that's a future driver of commerce. And so these platforms, they spend fortunes on algorithms to try and predict and serve you what you want on a silver platter before you even know what you want. And so that's how they're winning the battleground for attention in this world. And they are winning, right? Because attention is the only currency that really matters. And personalization is a key weapon. Now, again, that's phrasing the problem. Let's talk about potential solutions. You don't need algorithms. Once again, as an association, you're in an advantageous position. Why? Because you already know a lot about your delegates by the nature of your business and your business model from the membership and attendance, right? So you have a head start. And one thing that you can really start doing, and you ought to start doing, it's very feasible, but it's still way too uncommon, is the practice of segmentation, right? That's another word I want you to remember.
Segmentation. So what is that exactly?
Segmentation, right?
The key word for today.
Yes, exactly. And so what happens in a lot of businesses, including associations, is that they treat their audience or their membership base a little bit like a monolith, right? They send the same newsletter and the same content to everyone on their mailing list. What is relevant to you, you place that burden on the receiver, right?
Yeah, tell me about it. I mean, in my humble experience, I get not thousands, but dozens of press releases which are not specifically targeted at me. And I have the feeling that people should know that we write for and with associations, and the irrelevancy of some press releases that I get is, to me, beyond understanding from time to time.
Right. So you just more and more start tuning out the message. And so the engagement is lost, right? It's the opposite. That is the opposite of community building, right? You're actually alienating your membership base. So it's really important to change this to stay relevant. And so one of the practical things you can start doing that tomorrow. You don't need sophisticated billion-dollar algorithms, is look at your list and start segmenting and admit to yourself that the content that might be relevant to, let's say, a CEO type in your community is probably likely very different from the type of content that is relevant to let's say, a junior person or a student. So you want to start segmenting based on a whole number of parameters, on their title, on their demographics, on where they live, what language they speak, user parameters like what's the last time they logged into your community, how many articles do they read. You have all these parameters that you can start segmenting your list on, and that's a very important thing to start doing.
Well, that's fair enough to me, but how do you, I mean, I like when things get very practical, if I may. So how do you practically do that when you have a database which is made up of literally thousands of contacts? You can just look at it with a magnifying glass, obviously. How do you do that?
Well, how do you do it in real life? Is what I would say. How do you do it in real life, really? Like, I always think that going back to the basics of human nature and human psychology is the best way to answer these questions. How do you do this in real life? If you're faced with a group of new people and you want to, let's say, segment them, right? You use a methodology that is as old as civilization itself. You ask questions, right? Because every answer that you get allows you to segment further and drill down into the essence of who are these people and how can I categorize them. And so as you generate a more complete profile of every person, you're able to serve them content that is tailored for them. And it's that personalization. When you get a newsletter, which is fine, it's good to send out newsletter, but when you get one, and instead of a whole burst of articles that are not relevant to you, you get nuggets of information that are designed for you, that is really, really valuable, because after all, we're still dealing with people, right? A person is not an email address, and still sometimes we treat them that way, or very often. And have you noticed, for example, how some people are great conversationalists in life? And if you start looking at the psychology of that, the reason often why we find someone a great conversationalist is not because they speak a lot, like I'm doing, but because they ask a lot of questions. Right. So it's good to take an interest in people. People like to feel valued and appreciated. And you can do that by asking questions, basically.
Well, you say that, but I guess some people hate it when brands and organizations question and pry. I mean, I don't like to be questioned all the time about what I am interested in, or what. I don't. Because there is this confidentiality dimension to it, and I don't like to answer all the questions that I'm being asked.
Yeah, I mean, I think that goes back to what we were just saying about segmentation. And the reality is, because most brands are not doing the segmentation and personalization and community-oriented thinking, is that what happens is when they do ask questions, they tend to be entirely self-serving, simply for the purpose of asking annoying questions and then to serve annoying ads that chase you all over the internet, even though you never asked for them, right? We all know what that's like. And that's creepy. It's not nice. You don't feel appreciated. You feel stalked. So what I'm saying is, like, it pays off to bring it back to a human level and take a genuine interest in people, right? And when you ask people relevant questions that are relevant to them as human beings, not just a job title, people are willing to open up and volunteer much more information than they would otherwise. Right. And then again, once you're better informed, it's a positive feedback loop. You get better informed, you can send out more relevant information and ask more questions. So you get this ever more detailed profile of who people are. So again, like you like to get practical, so let me get practical and give you an example. So for boardroom, for example, or for ICCA, right? Let's say that you send an email the next time. Rather than sending a giant email burst with all of your latest articles that you want to share, and still put them in, that's fine, it's great. But start with a question. Put a question at the top of the email body that is relevant to your audience. Like, for example, in both cases of boardroom and ICCA, because you serve a similar audience.
Sure. Yeah.
You know, imagine that you open the email and there's a giant question there that says, are you confident in your virtual event skills and abilities for the future? Yes or no? 2 buttons. Yes, big button yes, big button no. Right? People can start clicking on that. Not everyone will, but a significant percentage will click on that. And that starts your segmentation. And what just happened, you've divided your list already in 2 parts. And the people who have said yes, that they are confident, you don't have to start targeting with invitations to workshops by speakers about how to create the perfect virtual event. You reserve that for the people who said no, right? And that's the power of segmentation, is really driving value to people who are seeking that value at the time. But if you ask me what the best solution is of all, it's once again, it's communities and private virtual communities. It's a little bit self-serving for me to say that because that's what we do every day, but that's because I really think that that's the ultimate outcome. Because if you manage your own virtual community, you are collecting all of the data, right? You are controlling all the data, not some social media platform, which means you can use all of that data that's been volunteered to you by members, not stolen from them, to create ever more personalized value. And your members, and also by consequence, your sponsors, will thank you for it.
Well, obviously, I know what I'm going to be doing with my next newsletter. Thank you, Mark. So indeed, I think we understand what segmentation is all about. And I understand that segmentation is already an improvement, and an easy improvement compared to what you were used to doing not so long ago. So is there any other change that you think associations should make to be future-proof and to, I'm going to say all those buzzwords now, if they want to thrive in the post-COVID world? I mean, we're still in COVID world, unfortunately. And what's the role of innovation in that? What's your take on that?
Yeah, I think you've hit the nail on the head. I think we should stop using words like post-COVID and innovation and all this. I think people are pretty sick of that.
Yeah, it was just for you to
please
hit me a little bit with a stick.
Right on the other side. Don't switch this channel. We won't use any of those. And here's the reality: innovation is not an outcome. It's a process. It's an ongoing, continuous process. So one of the things that I said before, and which I'll come back to now in trying to answer that question, is stop defining your business too narrowly. Stop living in a box that you've created yourself, and instead start thinking more like a laboratory, like a lab, right? Why? Because lots of disruption is going to keep coming, and I'm not going to make myself popular by repeating that, but it's just a matter of fact in the world. We live in a volatile and uncertain world, and that's not going to stop. So business as usual is an antiquated concept. And so while maybe you're still at the moment worrying about what your competitors do or what's happening in the industry, in the future you're not going to worry about what your competitors are doing or how they're disrupting you, because you are going to be too busy disrupting yourself all the time.
Or it's just this disruption is becoming business as usual. That's what it is.
Yeah, effectively, that is becoming a business model. It's this disruptive and later self-disruptive way of doing business, where you reinvent yourself all the time to stay ahead of the volatility. It's a cat and mouse game. And so it takes a fundamentally different mindset than what we're used to. And maybe entrepreneurs, we have some kind of advantage there in the sense that whatever we build as technologists is obsolete a year or 2 years later. So we live in this constant state of discomfort where we have to keep innovating all the time just to survive. But the beauty of that uncomfortable position is that that's what drives ingenuity, right? You know, comfort is not a catalyst for creativity. But now, having said that, it's completely unreasonable for me to sit here and to imagine or expect that all of these companies and associations become technology labs, right? That's not what I'm saying at all. I'm just saying that if you adopt that new iterative mindset, and by iterative, I mean taking a lot of small steps very frequently, right? One of the problems in the association and the events world as well is that it's full of perfectionists, right? You want to get everything 100% right before you run that congress or events. But unfortunately, that is the opposite of how the iterative business model works, because the iterative business model says invent yourself and reinvent yourself all the time. And if you don't want to have disruption imposed on you, then you have to become the instigator of disruption. And so what I'm advocating is that allow time for experimentation and ideation. And for those who don't know what ideation is, it's part of a methodology called iterative design thinking. And in a nutshell, in simple terms, ideation just means, throw stuff at the wall to see what sticks, right? So get your teams together and throw all ideas, no matter how crazy they are, throw them all on the table and make sure there are many ideas from other industries as well. Throw them all on the table and start eliminating the things that don't define you well or that you don't want to do until you are left with what you can do, right? It's because it's by eliminating the things that you're not that you start finding out who you really are. A bit philosophical, but I think it's a great business process as well. So finally, I would say that, have every company assign one person at least who has the freedom to invent and experiment all the time freely without there being tangible results attached to it, right?
Sure. So there's a few there's a few words ending with shun that we have to remember from hopefully this session. So there is segmentation, there is ideation, there is disruption, there is experimentation. All those shun words are easy to remember, and that's the hopefully the takeaways that our audience will take.
Yeah, so to finish on that point, I think those are keywords, and that iterative mindset is a hard thing to accomplish. But I would say, that's one of the reasons we are all sitting here as human beings, is because that's how nature got to us. It's been an experimental process. Evolution itself is a matter of making lots of mistakes all the time, and yet you end up with human beings. So it's something that works, and it's something that businesses should not be afraid of, right? Be experiment driven.
Well, thank you, Mark. I see that there's a few questions that have popped in while we were talking, and there's a good one, I think, which goes back to this member-customer difference or non-difference that associations have to make or don't have to make, because, like you explained, the members of an association are also their customers. But should associations involve the broader community of stakeholders in whatever they do? What's your take on that?
Yeah, I would say yes. I mean, your community is not just the paying members. Your community is broader than that. In fact, you can look at it a little bit as a pyramid as well, right? And so you have to make this distinction between your membership, your community, and your audience. And there are three distinct things, right? Your membership is really those paying members in the classical model of an association. They're just your paying members that are a subsection of the community, right? And the community is your stakeholders, is all the people basically who derive or give value to your overall community. That can be your board members, it can be keynote speakers, it can be mentors, it can be your membership base, it can be students that you involve, it can be an educational aspect that you involve. So that is your community. And the third part is your audience. And your audience really is the aggregate of all of those. So the audience, for example, are the people that you speak to on social media. Those are your members, they're your stakeholders, but they're also everyone else. People who've sporadically opened the newsletter, who've heard about you maybe once, who follow a few of your tweets. That's your audience, but that's not your community. Your community is your membership base and all of the stakeholders who derive or provide value from your association.
Right. So depending on if it's a stakeholder, if it's a member, obviously your message or the way you communicate with them will have to change. And again, segmentation, that's what it's for.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, think about it as a hotel. In a hotel, you have the community in a hotel, which is short term. It's for a few days. let's say when everyone's checked in. But the community in the hotel is not just the guests. The community is also the front desk and the GM and the guy who's serving you, a vodka. All part of your community. They're all your stakeholders. The only people who are not the community, but might be the audience, are the people walking past the hotel outside, right? So that's kind of the analogy that I would give.
Sure. And if you don't mind, I'd like to go back to this technological approach that you mentioned earlier, because you didn't quite answer my questions, because I feel, again, it's always good to be very, very practical, especially in these dire times. So what would you say to an association that has no clue where to start with their digital transformation? Because obviously the big ones or the medium-sized ones, they know more or less what to do, but there's plenty of small associations out there with hardly any staff, but who would like a piece of the cake in a way. So what piece of advice would you give those smaller associations with their digital transformation?
Very good question. I think there's probably three potential routes that you can take. The first one is to close the door and run for the hills. I don't imagine that that's desirable. The second one, depending on the scope of your operation, is to engage and hire someone internally who is tech savvy and hopefully can be that person that I was talking about, who has the freedom to be an iterative thinker and experimenter. But then there are other associations where that's not an option, or strategically that doesn't work in the short term. And again, this might sound a little bit self-serving, but I'm not talking about us here necessarily, is find a partner, right? Find a partner who is tech oriented, who can hold your hand and guide you through this whole transformation that is happening. And I would say when you pick that partner, it has to be on the basis of empathy, right? In fact, the less, even though that you're talking about tech companies, the less they talk about technology, the better a likely partner they are, right? Because you need to have that empathy as a tech company to be able to relate to an association. So find that partner in whatever shape or form that comes, right, to guide you along the way. Don't waste too much time, or don't try to save too much budget by trying to do everything alone, because ultimately that's not your core business, right? That's what technologists and digital transformation companies do. So, find someone to guide you through that tunnel, basically.
Right. And there's another question which is a little bit more technical, if you like. It comes from Vienna, actually, all the way from Vienna. So they ask, if you create and save data based on the personal information and on the personal questions you ask, what about the giant GDPR question with all the time that you spend gathering that data? What about those GDPR questions?
Yeah. Well, GDPR is a subject that's going to take us way beyond this session. And I actually read the whole GDPR policy from back to front. I don't know how many people have done that, but I read the whole thing. We can't go into too much detail, but I think there is a little bit too much fear about GDPR almost, right? It's been so effective that it's scared the wits out of everyone. But the reality is, and now this is a reductive, simplified answer, but as long as you have consent, and you explain to people exactly how you are going to use that data, and you commit to have a foolproof and secure way of storing that data, and lastly, you give people a very simple and straightforward way to remove permanently their data from your platform or environment, you're fine. There's nothing wrong with storing data or aggregating information. All of the platforms do it. The point is you have to make sure those pillars are all in place, that you tell people what it's for, you give them a way out, and you make sure that the way in is one with full consent, right? So that's it in a nutshell. Don't worry too much about the storage of data. That itself is fine. You can do that.
Yeah, just make sure that as your users have a very simple way of erasing whatever data they want to erase, should they want to erase data that you collected. Yeah, it should be straightforward. Well, Mark, I think we're coming to an end of this session. Appreciate liked having done that with you. It was a really great conversation. Hope the audience felt the same way. Thank you all for your time and attention, and I'll see you in the networking lounge. Hopefully work with the ICCA family. Back to you, Natasha, and thanks everybody again for the opportunity.
Thank you, everyone. It was a great pleasure. Thank you. Hope to speak to you soon. All the best.